Well, hello, and thank you for taking the time to view my presentation about evangelical Zionism from the Sun Belt. And this is my dissertation defense of chapter 1. So we're going to get going here. So, my topic will focus on evangelical Zionist cooperation in the American South between 1975 and 2000. I'm going to examine how this particular region, specifically the state of Georgia, associated with distinct religious and political traditions, they became an important site for the development of pro Israeli alliances. And this reshaped the American foreign policy advocacy of evangelicals and Jewish communal politics. I'm going to focus on the broader Sun Belt, but really the state of Georgia is going to be the emphasis. And I'm going to emphasize one particular church within the Southern Baptist Convention and the Southern Baptist Convention as a whole. And I'm going to focus on the aftermath of the Six-Day War in 1967 because there was a shift that occurred at this time politically and also theologically, and it forged strategic partnerships through shared theological language, grassroots mobilization, and coordinated policy advocacy. So, my research questions, I have three listed here. There are probably several more that I didn't say, but the American South, basically, how did the American South, particularly Georgia, between 1967 and 2000, become an important site for the development of pro Israeli alliances that reshaped both American foreign policy advocacy and Jewish communal politics? Next, how did the Southern Baptist Convention become energized in the aftermath of the Six-Day War of 1967? And how did this shape its political alignment with American Jewish advocacy organizations such as PAC? And what factors contributed to the later fragmentation of this particular alliance? And finally, why did the American South, particularly the SBC, become a key site of evangelical Jewish pro Israeli cooperation between these years? And how did regional political culture shape the durability of that alliance? So I'm going to start with the SBC here. So these questions are significant because most historians situate evangelical support for Israel within a broader development of Sunbelt conservatism and Republican political mobilization. So there's no study to date that emphasizes Georgia as a major catalyst in accelerating the movement. Typically, they look at Washington, D.C. You've got I've only found one historian who focuses on a state in general, and that state is California. That's Darren Dochuk. And so he's probably most aligned with my thesis, and I'll be refuting his thesis of California and arguing that Georgia is more significant, which is quite a task. And the more I look into it and I see what occurred in California, especially in the 70s and 80s, and the number of Jewish organizations they have there, and the number of evangelical organizations that found their birthplace there, it definitely is a challenge, but I think it's very doable just looking at the nuanced differences, and I'll show you why. So, and Dochuk argues for California for the reasons that I just said. However, Georgia has only about 75 Jewish facilities and compared to the hundreds that are in California. However, the ones in California are separate entities for the most part. They operate at the local level, whereas in Georgia, we are a united front in terms of Jewish organization, and this allows cohesion. Information can spread more rapidly because of this. And so they have these relationships with the AJC specifically, and also local news channels and things like that. And they can just get the word out in a more collective way than the ones in California. And so, particularly, the work of the Southern Baptist Convention is significant because the convention was founded in Augusta, Georgia. And so it's got its roots here and it's located in the heart of the Bible Belt. They have efforts in California, those are coordinated by the California Southern Baptist Convention. But in today's world, they have to adopt to a highly diverse, secularized, politically liberal state where we're in the Bible Belt. And yes, Georgia is becoming sort of a purple state politically, but we still have many evangelical roots here that run very deep. And so California is, particularly the San Francisco Bay Area. And this is one thing that Dochuk doesn't mention. I was really surprised. He doesn't mention Bible Study Fellowship, which came right out of the Bay Area. And he also doesn't mention John MacArthur's Grace Community Church. And I felt like those were two very essential evangelical organizations. But basically, it's things like that that cause California to be sort of an incubator for these prophetic ministries. But, between 1970s and 1980s, Georgia offered an established ideological pattern through already existing denominations. So, whereas California was the birthplace, and Georgia, of course, was the birthplace for some as well, but Georgia has these already set up organizations, and that makes the movement an easier process, more rapid, and they don't really have to pioneer anything new. They're using already organized institutionalization to push these political ideologies and things like that. Now, in another sense, we also have a number of Jewish people in Atlanta. Now, again, California has a larger Jewish population. Now, Jewish migration to Georgia was one of the earliest. It happened in 1733. Today, those Jews are well established again. So, kind of this running trend of already established not only theological organizations, but also Jewish organizations as well. And so you have a number of organizations like AIPAC. You also have the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta and many others. And prior to 1967, American foreign policy in the Middle East was typically restrained. The Six-Day War permanently altered the dynamic. So when Israel defeated this coalition, you guys probably know the history, right? Israel defeated the Arab states. They gained control over the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, and all that. And so then that creates a shift, right? So in Atlanta specifically, which is the headquarters of the Southeast Regional Operation for AIPAC, they focus on grassroots movements, and they really became much more politically active after 1967. There was a lobbying force that was created to ensure ongoing American diplomatic and military backing for the Jewish state. So that brings me to key sources. So I'm going to be looking specifically at First Baptist Woodstock, and I was a member there, full disclosure, for quite some time, about 14 years. And so I'll be going back through the sermon archives and things like that, looking up which sermons discuss Israel specifically between these years, and maybe even, I might even go into 2010 a little bit just to look at the trajectory. But I'll be doing, quote, pew level research, right? So looking at the local level, also looking at the overarching sources from the SBC and the ideologies that kind of trickle down. But I'll be looking at sermons, church bulletins, ministry catalogs, discipleship resources, and things like that. And I'll be making a trip to the SBC archives as well. And so the SBC annuals I have found to be an incredible resource because it kind of offers a snapshot of the year. And it's got a lot of statistical data in it and things like that. I'll also be looking at secondary historiography. Darren Dochuk, of course, Barry Hankins, Christian Smith, Victoria Clark was another one. So just a number of essentials. Now, in terms of methodology for this project, I'm going to adopt a theological, political, social, and cultural approach. And so the work is going to consider Zionism in conjunction with other quintessential Southern Christianity. It's essential to note that Zionism is technically a secular pursuit. Herzl, who's known for Zionism, the sort of like the father of it, he was agnostic. And so it's important to note this because you cannot just assume that there's this alliance between Jews and evangelicals automatically. And some of my secondary sources really speak into this, that Jews have a different perspective of evangelicals than evangelicals actually have of Jews. And so, I'm going to look at this and talk about how the two are historically distinct ideologically, but they do gradually converge together because, even the oldest of foes have a shared goal. They come together, right? And historically, Jews really got along with Arabs better than they got along with Christians in a lot of regards. And it's really kind of a novel thing that we see this evangelical alliance today. So, on the evangelical side, you have John Nelson Darby's dispensational theology. It reshapes Protestant understanding of church history. Almost every secondary historian mentions this or explains it at length. So, I definitely will build on that. I think America as a whole has been supportive of Jews. Darby's dispensationalism created an acceleration, I suppose, or maybe a shift. And it was really after the Six-Day War that this became more political for evangelicals. So, and it's definitely intertwined with Cold War anti-communism and conservative action, things like that. And it's part of the just general evangelical identity today. So, how will I fill gaps? So, I've kind of already said this, but I'll just kind of say it again in a new way. So, Georgia is an underexplored topic in the discussion, and the dissertation will put Georgia on the map and at the forefront. Building on the work of Dochuk and a few others, it will argue that Georgia's importance lies in its pre existing concentration of evangelical institutions. Now, during the late 20th century, Georgia had an established network of religious and political organizations, including the SBC, which is probably one of the most important. I'm going to argue it's the most important. And the rapid expansion of influential Atlanta area megachurches. The growing infrastructure in the Republican Party in the South is also important. And they boasted an established Jewish community that was largely unified. So, together, these institutions transformed theological commitments into coordinated political activism, and that makes Georgia a strategic nexus in the development of modern evangelical support for Israel. So these are just a few. I didn't put all of my sources on the slides, but these are a few of the most salient monographs. And here's a few primary sources. I cited the Southern Baptist Convention annuals here. And you can see the biography on the discussion board for a full list of resources. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to view my presentation, and best of luck to all of you.